evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host Thomas Sheridan. It's the 5th of August 2015, and tonight we'll be talking about a few things, but predominantly the show will be about dolmen. Yes, those dolmens, those strange megalithic rocks with the capstones that appear all over the world. Before I get to that, I want to talk about a few announcements and a few things that have happened lately. Firstly, on the last show, I said that many of you were seeing buses in your dreams and were on buses or buses that did not reach their destination. It may be a bit of a stretch, but there was quite what could have been a potentially a very serious bus accident in London yesterday when a tourist bus hit a tree and tore the roof off it, and it did make world news because it was full of tourists. So that may have been a hit in that regard. The dream stories are still flying in. Keep them coming in. I'm not going to do these dream announcements or dream predictions or whatever you want to call them on every week. It's every 2 weeks. And as I said, the thing will really come together in 6 months or so, and we're able to look back and have our minds blown. But we probably got a hit there yesterday with the bus thing. The China thing is still going strong. I don't know what's going on with China. It's a tricky one, but people are dreaming about Chinese and Chinese stuff still. But I'm not going to talk about too much about the dreams tonight. Well, the dream experiment, the sleep experiment part of it. Now, last week I spoke about the phenomenon which I call the electrical night jesters, which is almost like a kind of an electronic clown. Sorry about that interruption. We had a technical hitch. The signal dropped or something. Nobody's fault. These things happen. And as I was saying, last night I had an electrical night jester dream, and like all these electrical night jester dreams, they're very powerful emotionally. Now this one was very interesting because in the previous times I've had this dream, it's been a terrifying experience. This time it was the opposite. In my living room is a tall bookcase, it's nearly 7 feet tall, a wooden bookcase, and there's nothing on the top at the moment except boxes holding board games for playing. And in the dream, I was standing or sitting on the chair looking at that tall bookshelf, and on the top of it was what looked like a mechanical automaton of Pennywise the clown with long red hair, which is kind of weird, on top of the bookshelf, about 18 inches tall. This automaton was, and it was mocking me. It was like waving its hands towards me and moving back and forth. And in the dream, my cat Billy Meep, the tabby, jumped up and grabbed the Pennywise automaton and he pulled it down to the ground, and I burst out laughing in the dream. It was like one of these very sort of soul laughs when you laugh from the depth of your soul. Now I think that's very powerful because when I've had these what I call electrical night jester, you can look on my blog to see the article about it, electrical night jester type experiences, the sense of terror is absolutely horrific, but it's a weird kind of terror. It's coupled with absurdity. You cannot believe how absurd it is. In the Whitley Strieber movie Communion, this kind of wind-up toy floats into his bedroom and is floating towards him as it's like making a kind of a mechanical noise. And there always seems to be a spiral involved in these things for some reason. And this thing last night, this clown had spirals on it, and he was laughing but also in terror and pointing at the thing, saying, "You can't be real. You're not fooling me," or something like that. Christopher Walken. It's exactly what an electrical night jester experience in a dream feels like. So anyway, when my cat in the dream, Billy Meep, pulled the thing to the ground, the laugh that I was laughed in the dream was a kind of a laugh that was, it was like it came from the soul. it was a release of enormous amount of energy, that this thing that could potentially have terrified me was brought down to the ground by my cat. And it was almost like this thing had no power. For instance, it was a small thing. It was taken down by a cat, so it lost its power. So what does that mean in terms of that this thing, this entity, this archetype has lost its power over my consciousness now, because I spoke about it last week, and many of you shared your tales about it with me. So that's a really, really interesting thing. And I was planning never to really tell you about my dreams on that, in terms of the dream or sleep project, but I wanted to tell you that one because it was significant. And so if you do dream of these sort of like mechanical electrical demons sucking the energy out of you and having tremendous emotional intensity on you, there's two sides to it. They're also defeated and in the dream, and also there's an element of ridicule back towards them. So that was that last night's dream I had, which I thought was quite interesting, and I'd be interested to know if any of you've had anything similar. Now, another announcement today is that, sorry about that, and welcome back. The electrical internet radio jesters have been hammering us tonight. Either way, there will be a very high quality recording of this on my YouTube channel, Thomas Sheridan Arts, later on tonight. So no harm done. We'll get through this one way or another. Now, I want to make a special announcement of an upcoming film project I'm involved in, and I announced the day on my Facebook page, and it's also on my website, and many of you seem very excited about the idea. The film that I'm making is with a guy. If you're on my Facebook page, you'll know about him. He calls himself Mark McMark, and he has a website called McMark Metascience, and he has come up with an idea for a film. Now, the reason why I'm putting my name behind this is because this guy is very similar to me in many ways. We see things very, very similar. His idea about the history of these islands and Scandinavia and Northern Europe is very, very similar to my own. Both very interested in the tarot, very interested in the idea that there was definitely a very different society, particularly emanating from these islands. When I say these islands, I mean Scandinavia, Britain and Ireland, and possibly even Iceland. Now, then some kind of cataclysm that led probably to the collapse of Doggerland that destroyed everything. And the Druids did survive, but there was a tremendous corruption to have us absorbed into this idea that our real history emanated from the Middle East. And so he has come up with an idea for a film called The Mystery School Road Trip, where he will take, with me as the host of the show, of the film, on a road trip around the north of England, where we will all prove for a fact that they will see occult knowledge encoded in stone and metal by elite groups that is officially denied its existence. The group will visit a city purposely built as a giant occult ritual site on top of a sacred energy vortex, turning it into a hellmount. The group will see evidence that Druids never went away, something I firmly believe myself, and regular listeners of this show know that. Like other resistance groups, went underground within the Illuminati, or whatever you want to call it, to fight for our souls. And we will also see evidence of the cataclysm that decimated the advanced global civilizations based in the UK and Ireland that has been covered up with ancient stories of aliens and gods. And you know that's right up my street. And that's why I've decided to put my name behind this project. And we're raising finances. We need a good bit of money because the purpose of this film is to make something that's cinematic quality, good enough for TV. There's two reasons for this. This thing will not be a truther film. It will not be a conspiracy theory film. It will be made to a very high level of broadcast, both in its look, if we get the money, and its presentation style. So there'll be none of that dun 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 conspiracy music and the number 666. None of that nonsense. This is the real thing. It has been cracked. The evidence presented will be bulletproof. And that's the purpose of the high quality. It will be sent out. People will be able to watch it free online. There'll be no downloadings once the thing is up and running. You'll be able to show it to your friends who think you're a nut, and they will not be able to dispute it. This thing will be seismic. It will be seen by millions and millions of people. The reason why we're rushing up and doing it and not announcing where it is because what will happen is this evidence will be removed. And that's why we want to get the best quality film footage of these places and artifacts before the people or the individuals or the secret societies who guard them find out about it. So it's almost like a conspiracy road trip, a mystery school road trip coupled with a kind of a guerrilla commando mission. And 4 of you out there could be selected to be a part of it, to go down in history. You'll be able to take part in innocent experience and then share it with the world. There'll also be an embedded, credible journalist from alternative media who will be there to act as kind of like a watchdog to show that it's all real and none of it is forged. It's all the real thing. And my job will be to present the film, to be like the host. In that style, I'll be like the David Attenborough, and it should be mind-blowing. It should be so powerful, it'll probably be, if not bigger, than Holy Blood, Holy Grail was in the 90s. Remember when Holy Blood, Holy Grail came out, nobody knew about Rennes de la Chateau, nobody knew really about Rosslyn Chapel, nobody knew about the Knights Templars. And now you have things like the Da Vinci Code and its common world knowledge. Everybody's into this stuff. This will be the same thing. It'll take it to that level and maybe even beyond. So if you want to contribute to the GoFundMe, and I'll push the link below at the bottom of the screen, anything you can help. I often get people saying to me, do I take donations? No, I don't. But if you want to give money towards a film and be part of something amazing, you can go to the GoFundMe page. If you go to thomassheridanarts.com, you will see on the side something saying special announcement. Click there and you get all the details on the film, and you'll also get all the things you can join, like the Facebook page and so on, for updates, as well as the direct link to the GoFundMe page. I'll also post this link below this video on YouTube, so you'll see it below here so you can get to it. This is going to be enormous. This is not a decision I took lightly to be a part of this. It's, you know me, I'm probably the most conservative person in the scene. I mean, I don't do the aliens thing. I've no interest in that. I don't believe any of that is real or any of that stuff. And I'm very vocal against the flat earth people and all that kind of thing. However, I'm an old-fashioned conspiracy theorist, and I research and I work in facts. I don't channel messages from aliens. I don't channel messages from gods. I don't do psychic work. I don't do anything like that. I ignore all that stuff. I go back to the earliest documents and books I can find, and I dig out the stuff. And Mark does the same too. So what you're going to get, it'll be pure quality. Absolutely. It'll also blow your mind, because it's going to open a can of worms that will never be opened, and it may, it'll lead to healing. It'll lead to healing, to show that people on these islands are all the same. We all come from a similar kind of root, and all the things put on top of that, like nationalism and religion and all regionalism that was piled on top of that, is nonsense. We were an amazing civilization that had Irish Sea. On one side was the trade based around the Irish Sea, and the other side between Britain and Ireland, Scotland and Ireland, the Isle of Man, and on the other side the North Sea between Scandinavia and Britain and Scotland. And this is what the harrying of the North that took place in the time of William the Conqueror was about. It was to go to the north of England, as was the successive genocides that took place in Ireland, particularly the harrowing of the north. That was to go up there and to remove the indigenous North British population, so there'd be no trace of this remarkable civilization would ever be remembered by anyone. This is why they smashed up stone circles, monuments, you name it, and all the truth was hidden. The same thing happened why they replaced the Scottish Highlanders with sheep later on. The same idea, all the handed down knowledge was gone. The same thing that happened in Ireland. You had decimations of population. It came later. It was not as there was not the same sense of expediency to wipe the Irish out because we had a different language, but there was for people in the north of Britain because they spoke English, and they had to be sorted out right away. And that's why the British Empire began by conquering the north of England. They were the first victims of the British Empire. And so if you want to be a part of something it's going to blow your mind, because there's nothing like that out there. There'll be nothing like this yet. And it won't be something in a far off land about the Middle East or any Tibet or any of that nonsense. If you live on these islands or in Scandinavia, it will be about the soil under your feet. You do not have to go looking at maps of Babylon anymore and listen to that nonsense. You will not have to be bothered with nonsense about Tibet, or you'll be able to find your true spiritual, social, and cultural traditions on these lands. You will no longer be a psychological and spiritual refugee. We're going to come home. So please fund the film if you can. Mystery School Road Trip. It's an association. Mark Metascience in association with Thomas Sheridan Arts. We'll hopefully get the film out this year, and go to my website, Thomas Sheridan Arts, and be a part of your own salvation. And also that includes people who have their heritage and roots are in this part of the world. If your background is from northern Iberia, where our original ancestors came from, to Iceland, to Scandinavia, to the British Isles, to the Irish Isles, wherever you want to call it, and northern France, this is it. Denmark, this is it. Jutland, this is your stuff. Your ancestors came from there. You no longer have to pretend that you're a Tibetan or a Native American or an Egyptian or a Babylonian or a Semite anymore in order to have spirituality and a sense of home, because we're going to give it to you. And then we're going to move on. Now, so that's the film, Mystery School Road Trip. And one more thing is that a body has been found in Manchester in the canal today on Ashton-under-Lyme in the Portland Basin. So we're getting that's up to nearly 70 bodies of men have been fished out of the Manchester canals since 2009. Now, the details are still sketchy. They said it was a man. They did not mention the age group. The Portland Basin is a large canal basin. I think it's in like the northeast of Manchester, out by Staley Bridge direction. Now, heading towards Yorkshire. I've had some interesting experiences with the mainstream media over this story. My blind spot documentary film, short film, has got a lot of attention in high places, mainly because it's getting people in Manchester to ask the police why they're not doing anything. And sorry again for that interruption. We'll just keep on moving on. I don't know what's going on tonight. Apparently the signal is being messed with on both sides. We'll persevere no matter what. The bastards won't shut us down. Now, as I said, the interest in the blind spot film has alerted people in mainstream media, and there seems to be an interest in me. The first thing that happened was a journalist from a Manchester media outlet, one of the biggest ones, interviewed me. Was very, very sympathetic towards my my theories and very praising of my film and very direct and honest with me in being candid about the relationship between the media there and the police regarding this issue. I can't go into any more because the email exchanges have a basically a non-disclosure rider in the bottom of them, so I can't go into more detail about that. But I don't know what's going to develop there, if it'll be printed or not. It's been on the editor's desk for a couple of weeks. I don't know if it's in the bin. But another thing that's happening is, and this is a danger and why I'm very wary of the mainstream media, is a journalist from one of the larger British gutter press tabloids has been sniffing around me, contacting people on my Facebook page, this kind of thing, trying to find people who knows me, probably as part of sussing me out because of the film. What the agenda there is, I don't know, but it's a scumbag newspaper that's had many decades of a scumbag agenda. So if anything goes on there, it should be interesting. Either way, I'm not bothered, because the fact that the Blind Spot film is getting this attention is a very good thing, because unlike the scumbags in mass media, not all of them, most of them, I'm much more interested in saving lives than trying to shut down another person's journalism, shall we say. And that's what that's really about. These journalists, a lot of them get jealous when they see something like my Blind Spot film. They know that they will never be allowed to do that level of investigative journalism. They went to journalism school. They've never reached that level. They've never been allowed to do it. It would never be out there. And so they're completely censored and harnessed. So they have a vendetta. Vendetta. You see, it's like David Icke this week has been, to his credit, vindicated with the whole Ted Heath thing. Now, half the reason these journalists would have called him a nutcase for years was because they knew about Ted Heath, and they knew they could never say anything about it, but he could. So much freedom in the alternative media. Why anyone would want to become a mainstream media person, journalist, is beyond me. But anyway, so that's the development there. Unfortunately, another body was found in the canals today, and the mainstream media are very, very interested in my Blind Spot film. Now, as an update to that, tomorrow night on Capricorn Radio, as you know, I've kind of retired from doing all media interviews, but I'm coming out of the closet for this one just because I want to talk to James Swagger about this latest update that's happened in Manchester and the developments, and a bit more background information on what I believe to be at least the possibility of a serial killer working in that city. Now, it's nearly halfway through the show. We'll probably run over a little late tonight. I want to now get to what the main topic tonight is dolmens. Now, dolmens have always fascinated me, just like all megaliths, but in the last few years, what has really struck me about the dolmens is just how common they are. They're not just common to Britain and Ireland, not just common to northern Portugal, to northern Iberia, to Galicia, not just common to other parts of Europe. They're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. There's some enormous ones in Russia, and some massive and incredible ones have been found in Korea. But they're everywhere. You look everywhere. The same idea, a large stone suspended above the ground, usually held up by 3 other stones. The strangest thing, now, there's no reason why these things should be built. There's many, many ways you can build a stone monument. There's many ways you could arrange stones in a specific, impressive way by piling them on top of one another. But for some reason, people all over the world went to enormous lengths to construct these stone megaliths, these stone edifices, using more or less the same technique, which is the most difficult way of making them of all. Now, tonight I'll be specifically speaking about the ones on these islands. They're the ones I know the best. These are the ones I've had first hand experience with, and so I'm not I'm not an expert on the other ones, but I want to talk about some theories I have regarding them. Now, if you've seen a picture of a dolmen or what a film of a dolmen, if you visit one, basically it looks like a three-legged stone table, and on top there's a capstone. Sometimes it's flattened off, other times it's round. It's actually quite more common, but sometimes it's absolutely massive. There's one in Ireland that weighs 160 tons on top of one of them. Just think about that. Now, like all the megalithic monuments built in these islands, the time frame that they were built across is absolutely immense. We're talking maybe even 4,000 years of them being built. 4,000 years of relative peace, I might add as well, with little or no evidence of warfare during the time of the megaliths. But yes, tremendous evidence of mass construction, social organization, and obviously healthy, strong societies, because you wouldn't be able to build them otherwise. In Ireland alone, there's between 50 and 60,000 megaliths that we know of. Just think about that. Just in Ireland, there's between 50 and 60,000, and it may have been much, much more, but these are the ones that we know about, that the remains are still found. And of the dolmens, there's several hundred, including ones up in the mountains here that are just magnificent. There's so many of them are photographed because they're photogenic or in certain locations, but other ones are in the middle of bogs and fields and surrounded by woods, and they're there. They're just as incredible. Now, it's almost like the dolmen in a megalithic collection of megaliths. It's almost like, certainly in Ireland, that the dolmens seem to be built firstly, and then after the dolmen has been built and it seems to be successful, cairns, that's the underground passages, seem to spring up all around them. But the initial sort of like element is generally a dolmen. Now, what's interesting is that in both Ireland and Wales, dolmens are called portal dolmens. Now, I find that term very, very interesting. Now, a portal, when you think of a portal, you think of a portal into a train tunnel, the opening of the train tunnel into the side of a mountain, or the opening of a road tunnel into the side of a mountain is called a portal. A portal is also the idea of moving between one state and the other. And this, to me, when they call them portal dolmens, the ones in Ireland and Wales, I think they've actually giving us, it's one of these secret truths that they say, oh, it's a portal dolmen, meaning there's a hole in it. But it's also these people that we're going to be exposing it, that in this movie, these druids who work within the elite to try and slip out secrets to us, they called it a portal dolmen because it is a gateway to another reality. You do not go to the trouble of lifting, in one case in Ireland, 160-ton stone pieces, mount them on 3 uprights. The capstone now is 160 tons, and mount them on 3 uprights in hundreds, maybe even thousands of locations on these islands for no other reason than they must serve a real function. They can't just be simply there for design or religion or to celebrate a king, especially when you look at how they were constructed. How the dolmen, now let's talk about the Irish dolmens tend to be massive. They're really big here in Ireland, where the Welsh ones tend to be more elegant and taller. And then many of the dolmens in, and it's the same story again. The earlier they are, the better they're built, and as time progresses, the construction standards are not as good as the initial early ones. It's generally agreed upon by academics, and I agree with them too, that the construction, this is the latest theories, and I think is the best one yet. The previous belief was that a large stone was found somewhere, brought to the site, and then levered up, and then usually the three, leg stones, the pivot stones they were on, pushed underneath. Now the evidence is suggesting something very different and something much more significant. That the stone was already in the ground. Like it was a large boulder that was laying in the ground, maybe with some of it buried under the earth and the rest of it exposed above the earth. Now this is significant because in the ancient religions of our ancestors, remember a few weeks ago I spoke about the tree that had been found inverted upside down at Treehenge in England, on the east coast of England, and how that signified the tree as above, so below, the roots and the branches, the roots extending into the supernatural world, the world of ancestors, the world of death, the world beyond the veil, and the upper part of the tree in this reality, tying very nicely into the Yggdrasil tree mythology of the Norse. The same thing would apply with the stones. You see, these people believed that stones were not inanimate objects to these people. They were alive and conscious to the people. They were repositories of ancient stories and lives. And when they would see was one large stone in the ground, with some of it sticking above the ground and some of it below the ground, it seemed to them, and this is my theory, this is not the academic one, that the part below the ground represented the stone in the other reality, in the other world, beyond the veil, in the world of shadow and magic and mysteries and the ancestors. And the part above it, just like the top of a tree, that where the roots are not, was its penetration into this reality. So this large capstone lying on the ground would have been seen to have both the aspects and the attributes of being both in this world and in the supernatural world. And this would have made it what? A portal. A portal dolmen. There's plenty of evidence they would dig up around the stone and then lift it up. They don't know the methods, but it's people say they used, like, they had anti-magnetism and all this kind of thing, or sound waves. It's quite possible with the right lever to lift tremendous weights up in the air, and then you could just pack them with soil underneath until you have them to the right height, and then you insert the three uprights. When the three uprights were inserted, and then the soil was scraped away to reveal the dolmen structure as we know them now, what's really interesting is that the undersides, in most cases, had been chipped away. Someone had got underneath the stone while it was raised up, because they found flakes of stone all over these sites, and chipped away to deliberately flatten the underside of the stone, almost to tune it or something like that. But it may have had another function. Remember, if that stone was in the world of the supernatural, the world of shadow, any flakes of stone that came off that would contain the attributes of the other side, and therefore they would have been prized relics. It would have been a stone. They would have been supernatural amulets, a gem or a piece of stone from another reality that you could have. So there's deliberate shaping of the underside. So the underworld was brought into this world, and you had a portal into the other world. What happened then, and this is probably why the Cairns went around it, and my theory is that when this, like in Penny Abandoned Wales, there's an enormous dolmen you can stand up under. There was one here in Sligo that was destroyed in the 1950s, but there were some of them were so tall you could actually stand up inside them. But if you were to go underneath the capstone, beneath the three uprights, you yourself were then in the world of the ancestors, and you could go on a vision quest. They were telephones to the other side. It was like a TARDIS. It was just like a stone TARDIS, and you were inside it. And when you were inside underneath that dolmen, you were no longer in this reality. And this is probably why the Irish mythology of the story of Diarmid and Grania is that for a period of time they lived under a dolmen while they were being chased across Ireland because if they had eloped. Maybe, just maybe, that indicates that when a person was under the dolmen, the law could not touch them, that they could not be touched because they would be respected and recognized as not actually being in this reality. They had entered into the world of the fairies, of the Tuatha De Danann. They were in a different reality. They had passed through the portal in the portal dolmen. The larger or the greater the weight of the capstone at the top would indicate that there was more of. You see, there wouldn't be just a matter of putting the biggest stone they could possibly get on top. If you look at the Irish ones that are up to 160 tons, they're not very thin stones. We often see photographs of the dolmens; they're often thin. Some of them are almost boxes or footballs. They're huge, they're massive, and that would have indicated that when they were lifted, they would have had. The reason why they went for bigger ones and higher is because they wanted the stones that had the most of their mass under the ground, and therefore the most of their mass in the supernatural world. So when they were raised up, they contained a greater frequency, should we say, range of the realities or the mystical insights of the supernatural world. And this has been, if you look at the Welsh ones that tend to be higher, the stone on the top tends to be wider, the capstone. So the area would still apply, that even though it wasn't a very thick stone, if it was a large stone covering a wide area, it would still have the same amount of its undersurface in the supernatural world. Where the Irish ones, like you see at Carrowkeel, it's like a ball. It doesn't matter. Maybe most of that was under the ground. You're still achieving the same effect. The raising of the height could be show prestige. The raising of the size. I mean, it's still amazing to me. They got 100. I know it's technically possible with levers to get, but they get 160 tons up in the air. Try doing that today with the latest machinery, and then to put in an element of fine tuning. There's an element of fine tuning to it. These things were almost like the center of the community. Now, there's also evidence where dolmens collapsed during construction, or they were erected and the dolmens fell apart. Something happened, they structurally weren't good enough, the bottoms fell away. And then the communities who built them vanished. They had no interest in them. It was a dolmen had to work, or it was no use to the community. There was no half-built or broken dolmen that was tolerated. If they lifted a dolmen up and it's broke, snap, fell over, or sunk into the ground after a while, the whole site would be abandoned and no cairns would be built around it. This thing was the center of their communities. Now, you don't go to that trouble just for you don't go to that trouble unless it has a profound impact on the society. Now, the great the great age of building cathedrals, starting in the Gothic period, the big stone cathedrals, and running right through to the Renaissance. The reason why the powers that be allowed these cathedrals to get bigger and bigger and get more complex and with more increasingly complex and dynamic engineering was because these were, and also employing thousands and thousands of stonemasons. This was because these skills in building these large cathedrals was also very useful for building fortifications, castles for the elite to be behind. So it was in the interest of a duke or a king or a baron or someone with enormous power to commission and to help fund an enormous cathedral in Europe somewhere in the Gothic era, in the Middle Ages era, right into the Renaissance, for two reasons. One, he could get on the good side of the church by saying this great man, Count so and so, paid for the building of this and his family for this enormous Gothic cathedral that took 400 or 500 years to build and employed so many stonemasons. That was one element of it. The other element of it was that it gave them the ability and the skills training to build enormous fortifications and castles, all to protect themselves. So ultimately, these stonemasons who were building these enormous cathedrals around Europe were actually building their own pens because they were on the outside and they could never, if they ever tried to revolt against the power structure was hidden behind a wall that these people themselves built. It wasn't the same with the megal, and also that did not stop war. The evidence was there were more castles that were built, the more cathedrals that were built, the more wars happened. In reality, with the Dolmens, the reverse happened. There's almost 4,000 years of no evidence of war in Ireland, and the same in Britain, during the building of the megaliths. These people knew something. These people had insights and secrets. 4,000 years, and remember, these were complex societies. If you're going to build something, if you're going to build a dolmen that's weighs 160 tons and it's lifted up in the air, you need a stable food source, you need plenty of healthy citizens, manpower, and you need a sense of organization that people will build this thing without thinking about it. During the building of the great cathedrals, they didn't build it so they'd get to heaven. They built it for money. And yet these dolmens were built in a pre-monetary system. There was no apprenticeships, there was nothing like that. Everybody was involved for some reason, and they built them. And even the corruption of everything, some of these are surrounded by what they call ring forts, and yet there's no evidence that these were used for fortification. It's the same reason they call them burial tombs. The burial tomb, the burial cairns, they're not. Maybe later on in some of them bodies were put in them, but we don't know what they were for. They were probably almost certainly for people to go on vision quests. Our ancestors on these islands, and I'm sure around the world as well, but I only know about the ones in these islands, didn't only live in this reality, they lived on both sides of the veil. And they became aware of insights on the other side of the veil that stopped them having wars and live in peaceful cohabitation. That absolutely is the evidence from Ireland, is you had thousands and thousands of clans and family groups building these megaliths, building these now, as we're finding out from the Irish Folk Park and Folk Heritage Museum, beautiful, elegant wooden structures, living next to each other in peace, when the reality is they should have been at war. for 4,000 years building megaliths. And I'm sure it was happening in Iberia and all the other places megaliths were built. This is why we're making this film. We're going to uncover that secret. This is why I have these dream and sleep experiments. I myself am trying to move all of us into a more full existence of what it means to be a human being. Yes, we have our everyday reality, but we also have our sleeping reality, and we're no longer in touch with that. We just fall asleep and think it's a period of rest when it's so much more. If this, what they call, so this whatever you want to call this movement now, or this scene, in my opinion, should stand for anything. It should be the greatest truth of all, and the greatest truth of all is that we're not destined to live the way we live right now. The greatest truth of all is that we capture our full world, and we live. See, you don't have to employ a shaman if that's how you live your own life. You don't have to go on a spiritual quest and look for a guru if you are able to move beyond both sides of the veil, both sides of the curtain, both sides of the shadow. This is what our ancestors did. Before something, either a supernatural a natural cataclysm or something, wiped them all out and allowed the infection from Rome and the Middle East to conquer these islands. It was probably related to what happened in Doggerland, and the whole collapse of that society into the North Sea probably created some kind of seismic shockwave that damaged people all over this part of Europe. We'll never know. Well, we're going to try and find out. Our ancestors were much more elegant, dynamic, spiritual, peace-loving, and were very, very far from the barbarians and the wild savages, the wild murderous savages that they were portrayed as when the Romans and then the rest of them came along. They were probably more powerful than they even got at the height of the British Empire. I mean, the original ancestors. But something happened. Something changed that. And that's why I make a big deal of studying Gaelic mythology. I mean, unfortunately, Anglo-Saxon mythology was wiped out with the harrying of the North. But anything like that, Norse mythology, anything. Because that, plus the deceptions created by the ruling elite, in particular the Jesuits, ever since then, and looking for the inconsistencies and the traits and the great way to discover the truth, I've always found, if the elites are pointing over here, look over here to the left, you must look over to the right. And the answer may not be in the right, but it might be in the middle. You'll get to it, but it won't be where they're pointing and telling you to look. In our case, they're pointing towards the Middle East. Look towards Babylon. Look towards the Middle East. That's where all the religion is. Look towards Tibet. Get your jungle juice in Peru. They never ever want us looking at what we are and who we are and where we came from in this part of the world, because they fear it greatly. And that's why they decimated Stonehenge by building a road next to it. That's why they decimated Newgrange by doing this bizarre 1960s brutalistic architectural facade on the front. This is why so many dolmens have been torn down and wrecked, and often find themselves on military lands for some very strange reason. The veil does not belong to them, for them alone to cross. The veil belongs to you and me and everyone else, and we have the ability to cross on both sides. And it's only by changing our consciousness to not one of believing we need a guru or needing salvation from outside, but moving with inside us and seeing the world in all those magical terms. For instance, tonight, one of my friends posted on a Facebook page mentioning the relationship between Jimmy Savile and Ted Heath. And I posted that was just a reflection at the top of a society, polluted society. What was going on at the bottom? You had Ian Brady and Moira Hindley at the bottom, Jimmy Savile and Ted Heath at the top. As above, so below, pathologically entwined from the top of society to the bottom. We have to demolish that instead of demolishing our megalithic structures and our dolmens. That is the foundations we have to undermine. And it's time for us to dig back into the ground and pull out the roots of who we were meant to be and not what they have unsuccessfully tried to make us in their image. So the day comes when we're no longer thinking about the monsters and the psychopaths at the top of society and how they relate to the ones at the bottom, but how we're able to think about our lives in this world and how it relates to our lives beyond the world of sleep, shadow, and dreams. Thanks very much. Please, please, please visit my website and click on the link below and contribute to this film project, because it really will be a wonderful thing. And I'll see you next week. Take care of yourself, and feck 'em if they think they a joke.